everyone, it's Hailey, and today I'm going to be talking about the third and final part of books that I've read during quarantine before I actually get back to normal recent reads videos. So while this is the final part of my books I read in quarantine series, I'll link the other two ones that I've done down below for you guys. This isn't the final recent reads video that I'm going to do because I have still been reading a fair amount, so I do have almost enough books to do another recent reads video, so it won't be too long before I have another one of those for you guys. Also, I wanted to address the fact that I have a giant scratch on my arm because I'm sure you guys will ask questions about that, but I was at my parents' house and I was trying to put Ella in the top basket of the cat tree and she pushed off of my arm to get up there, and it's just not a good situation. So yeah, I just wanted to address that because it looks like real bad. But anyways, I have a lot of really awesome books to talk about, so I don't want to waste any time and just get into it. But if there is a specific book that you are looking to hear about, I will have a list of the books in the description box down below, as well as timestamps, so you can just skip right to whatever book you wanted to hear about, or you can hear about them all because there's some really great ones here. So without further ado, let's dive right in. The first book that I have to talk about is a new favorite of mine. I really loved this book, and that is Felix Ever After by Kacen. This book follows Felix Love, who is a transgender teen who is grappling with identity and self-discovery, all while falling in love for the very first time. He's Black, queer, and transgender, and worries that he might be one marginalization too many for society to ever really accept and respect. And he ends up dealing with some transphobic bullying at his school, so definitely a trigger warning for that. But he ends up in a quasi-love triangle that unfolds because of a catfish situation as he's trying to figure out who the anonymous person is that has been bullying him. This book was such a delight to read because it hit so many levels. There were fun moments, there were sweet moments, there were heartbreaking moments, tearful moments, happy moments, and funny moments. It had a little bit of everything, and there was such an even, great balance of emotion in it, and I totally wasn't expecting that. Not until I was reading it, I was like, this book has like a really good grasp of emotion, and it was very refreshing. I loved the characters and all their relationships. The author did a fantastic job of writing characters. I absolutely fell in love with their characters. Like, Felix is a character that I was totally rooting for, and he had so many adorable moments, but you were watching him try to figure out who he is and trying to figure out his gender identity specifically, and he was just a very lovable character overall. He was dealing with a lot of things in his life. He had a lot of complicated relationships, including familial relationships, but also some of his friendships ended up being a little bit complicated, and he's in this love triangle that he's not expecting at all, and you like see him dealing with that, and I don't know, like there was just a lot happening in that love triangle, but I actually really liked it. Usually I'm not a fan of love triangles, but in this case I did enjoy it. I didn't really see where it was going, but then I was like, of course that's where it's going, and then I just loved how adorable it was. I feel like I have been reading a lot of books about self-discovery lately, and this was definitely one of them. And I've also been reading a lot of character-driven stories because I feel like oftentimes those stories that deal with self-discovery, they really usually are character-driven stories, and this definitely was one. It was fueled by Felix's self-discovery and really exploring his own identity. There were a lot of external conflicts going on too. You had a lot of plot points going on there, and I think all of it melded together really well, and while there was quite a bit going on, nothing felt out of place. I think this book is a perfect depiction of the confusion of being a teenager. Being a teenager is confusing for everyone, but especially with Felix trying to discover his gender identity, that is definitely confusing for him, and he also is trying to understand why he's being targeted for bullying, and facing such difficult bullying is also depicted very well. It was really difficult to read because of that, but I think that Felix faced it in a very brave way. It wasn't something that he should have had to face. What happens, just in case this is a trigger for you because it is transphobic bullying specifically, is someone reveals his dead name and puts pictures of him before his transition up around the school. That's not a spoiler, it happens in the beginning, but I think it is something that you should be aware of before going into the story because that is definitely a very, very hard thing to deal with. If it's something that you can personally relate to, I think that would be very difficult to read about. But that's how the love triangle situation unfolds because he's trying to figure out who would do this to him, him and who is targeting him, and he doesn't really understand why. So there's a lot of confusion surrounding Felix's environment. He's trying to figure that out. He's trying to figure out who he is, and all the while he's falling in love and he's trying to understand that as well. So many things happening, but really relatable for teenagers. On top of the messiness of his personal confusions just as an individual, the depiction of the messiness of high school relationships was really well done as well. I feel like high school relationships are so all over the place, like friendships and romantic relationships. All of it is just really difficult. High school is a really hard time, and I think this is a great read for anyone who's in high school because it does a very good job of portraying that struggle that you might go through while you're in high school. I did like the fact that this was an art school actually, particularly, so there was an artistic side to it. That was just another element that was added into the story, and I wasn't expecting that, but I very much enjoyed that everyone was an art student, so it was very artistically fueled. I think considering Felix as an artist and him not really knowing if he has the confidence in his art, and in particular they're working on self-portraits, I thought that was a really great vehicle to tell the story because obviously he's trying to discover who he is, and all the while he's trying to do the self-portrait project, which was an interesting combination because it's him trying to figure out who he is on the inside but also what he looks like on the outside and convey that through his self-portrait. Obviously this is a story that deals with a lot of LGBTQ plus aspects, and I think it did a fantastic job of that. It is an own voices story, so that was great. I just think that everything about that was well done. Like Felix goes to an LGBTQ plus therapy group, and I loved that that was something that was brought into it. Well, I've talked a lot about Felix because it definitely is a story that's driven by him and his thoughts and his perspective on the world. All of the side characters were also very well developed. All of his friends and his family members, I think, got equal parts on the stage, if you will. Especially Ezra was definitely a character you got to know a lot of, and you got to see the complications of his relationship with Ezra. They're super close and they're best friends, and you saw that relationship and kind of got to dissect it. And you also got his relationship with his father and his mother, which are both really complicated in their own way and difficult to read at times for sure. Those were some of the most heartbreaking moments. I think overall, I was super impressed by how well-rounded this story was. Every element felt really thoughtfully chosen and fit together super well. I feel like I've read some disjointed books recently, but this definitely wasn't one of them. I felt like everything meshed together perfectly, and it was a beautiful story, so much fun, but also really impactful at the same time, and it definitely has made me interested in more of this author's writing. I actually did pick up another one of their books that I plan on reading soon because I think that I will enjoy more of their works, just knowing how great they were with relationships and with characters. I just fell in love with all the characters, so I definitely want to see more of what they have to offer. So overall, I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. Obviously, I really loved it, and I highly recommend that you check it out. I know this book has been really hyped up, but I think it totally lives up to that, if not exceeds it, and it's a really great and important story. Now, going from a book that I really fell in love with, I then moved on to I Kissed Alice by Anna Birch, which I had been so excited for. I was super pumped for this book. It sounded like everything I would love, but I actually ended up DNFing it, which if you don't know, DNF is did not finish. So this is an enemies to lovers of female-female romance that follows two characters who go to an art school. They don't get along, they're rivals, they just haven't gotten along at all. But unknowingly, they actually are kind of friends because online they collaborate on this fan fiction comic graphic novel, and it's actually an Alice in Wonderland comic, which I didn't know before I started it, and I was like, oh my god, that's so cool. And there's actually like the illustrations are actually in here, which is what I'm trying to find right now, but this always happens. I can never find any of them. What struggles. Oh, there we go. So there are actually little comic strips in here, which I love when those added elements happen. You guys know by now. So I was like, I'm probably gonna love this story. Like, it sounds like everything that I would love. But I got to about 100 pages in. It just wasn't doing it for me, so I ended up DNFing it. My main issue is that, one, I'm not a huge fan of enemies to lovers. There are instances where I like it, it's just not my favorite trope. And with this one specifically, it was so focused on the enemies aspect of it. I didn't feel like the characters were developed beyond the fact that they hated each other. And I also didn't feel like the hatred had that much of a foundation for me me to really believe it, or honestly really believe that there was chemistry there besides that. They do end up competing for this scholarship later on, but that aspect took a very long time to get into the story. So for a while, I just kind of was like bored, but also it's dual perspective. So you get the perspective of both characters in here, both girls, but one of the biggest issues that I had was I couldn't tell who I was reading. Their voices were super similar, but also their circumstances were pretty similar. So I kept on having to flip back to see who I was reading about. I felt like there wasn't really any differences in the writing between the two characters, and they weren't distinctive enough for me to be able to differentiate between the two of them, which made it a very difficult read. I tried to push through as much as I could because it honestly sounds like something that I would love, and I wanted to give it a chance, but I felt like I had given it enough of a chance and the writing style just was not working for me. So I knew that it wasn't going to get better enough that it would be worth me trudging through that beginning. So it might get better. I got to like page 103 or something like that. So if you're into enemies to lovers and that's one of your favorite tropes, you might really enjoy this. It's just not my favorite, and the fact that it was so focused on that enemies aspect and the hatred, it just made it hard for me to read, paired with the writing style that I didn't really care for. I just didn't feel like it was worth it for me to continue. So I'm super sad that I didn't like this one, because like it has art in it and it's also an Alice thing, so I just feel like everything about it I would love. Also, like a female enemies to lovers, it does sound really good, but I don't know. I'm really sad about this one still, not gonna lie, but I did try. I feel like I was talking about how I had like a lot of good books on here, but there actually are a couple that I didn't care for as much as I was anticipating. It's kind of a good mix of books that I liked a lot and then books that I kind of had like mixed feelings about or didn't like so much. So the next book that I have to talk about is My Calamity Jane by Cynthia Hand, Brodi, Ashton, and Jodi Meadows. This is the latest book in the Lady Janey series, where it's a satirical historical fiction following different famous Janes. So the first one is Lady Jane Grey, the 9 Days Queen. The second one was Jane Eyre, so that one's kind of more of like a retelling sort of thing, but also historical fiction. And then this third one here is Calamity Jane. So these all have a different satirical twist to the story. So with the first one, it was Lady Jane Grey mixed with like there was horses. There was a character that turned into a horse. The second one, Jane Eyre, it had to deal with ghosts, so it was kind of like Jane Eyre meets Ghostbusters. And this one has werewolves in it. So very interesting combinations. Like they're books that shouldn't work, but they totally do. This one, however, was my least favorite of them. Here you follow Calamity Jane, Annie Oakley, and Frank Pistol Prince Butler, and they are in Wild Bill's traveling show, which is basically a front for them guru hunting, which is werewolf hunting. I don't know if that's like an actual name for werewolves. I don't know that much about that sort of thing to know that, but I didn't even remember that there were werewolves in this, to be honest, until I started reading it. Now, the reason that I picked this one up is because I wanted something happy, something fun, because I had kind of been feeling down in the dumps, and I was like, I feel like now is the time for me to read this, and it did make me laugh. I had fun reading it, but this one was very boring. So I still say My Lady Jane, the first book, is my favorite. The second one I liked a lot too. This one I gave a 3 out of 5 stars. I think the other ones I gave like a 4.5 and a 4, maybe a 5 for the first one. I can't remember, but part of this is personal preference. So I don't really care about the Wild West era. It's not something that I tend to enjoy reading about that much. I feel like there's a couple of books that I've read that are set in that time period that I've liked, but it's also not really a time period or a setting that I know that much about. I never learned about it in history class. Like, it's American history, and the American history that I ever did learn was not focused on the Wild West in this era at all. So I don't know anything about any of the characters in here. So that may have contributed to my lack of enjoyment of it. However, with My Lady Jane, I also didn't know anything about Lady Jane Grey, but I still liked it. But it's also the Tudor era, which I tend to enjoy reading about a little bit more. Honestly, one of the most fun parts about this for me though was I kept on thinking, because I really love Drag Race, so I kept on thinking about Alyssa Edwards in All Stars doing Annie Oakley and like her impression of Annie Oakley, and that's just all I kept on picturing for Annie Oakley. So that was a lot of fun. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that you go and look it up right now, because it's just like, it's really funny to watch her do it. There's like a scene of her in the workroom with the wig on and she has like the gun and she's just like, it's just really funny. If you like Drag Race, you know what I'm talking about probably. But anyways, the combination of that setting that I'm kind of meh about with the journey narrative left me feeling really bored. It took a long time for things to actually start to get going. So it kind of had that Hobbit style journey narrative where they're just kind of walking a lot. And I needed more action. I needed more happening. There were a lot of funny moments and there were some moments of action, but not enough for me to not be like, okay, like, I'm kind of meh about this right now. I did like the characters though. They were a lot of fun to read about. Like, I did get the satirical aspects that I was expecting. There were some instances where the narrator references like modern day, like specifically with talking about guns. That's obviously something that should be talked about because I mean, it's a big issue in modern day too, and that is addressed. However, it is kind of jarring to be taken out of that time period and be referencing present day. I understand why, but it was kind of like, oh, okay. And then you get back into the story. So like I said, 3 out of 5 stars for this one. I liked it. It just took a long time for the plot to get going. And then when it did, it wasn't really enough to hook me and to make me fall in love with it. So it was good. It was okay. It's definitely not my favorite, but I will be reading the Mary ones that they're coming out with soon. I think My Contrary Mary is the first one. I can't really remember. Is that The Secret Garden then maybe? I don't know. But the point is, I will read more from these authors. It just, this one wasn't my fave. I do want to mention though, this one did add some diversity to the story, which was much needed. So there's a female-female relationship that is part of the pretty main plot line. It's kind of like the side plot line, but it is involving one of the main characters, and there also is a Lakota character. Next, I picked up a graphic novel, which I tend to read on ebook just because I find it's a little bit cheaper that way, but that was Almost American Girl by Robin Hobb. This is actually a little bit different for me because it's a graphic memoir, and I don't generally read that much nonfiction, but I felt like this seemed like a really good read, and I'm glad I did pick it up because I really liked it. So this follows a Korean non-English speaking girl, Robin, who ends up being unexpectedly plucked from everything she knows living in Korea and being brought by her mother to live in Alabama. She thinks she's just going on a vacation, but her mother then tells her that it's a completely permanent move, which I can't even imagine, like, thinking you're going somewhere just to go on vacation and it's a completely different place than you're used to. You don't speak the language, and then your mom tells you that that's going to be your forever. Like, that, I can't even imagine living like that. But this book gave me the opportunity to see what that might be like, and I think it was a great depiction of the immigrant story. That's obviously like representation that I can't really speak to myself, but I felt like it did give me an idea of how difficult that would be for someone. Particularly, Robin is really young when this happens, so she doesn't understand that her mother is trying to do what's best for her. Her mother is living as a single mother, which is something that is frowned upon in Korea, and her mother's trying to give her as many opportunities as she can. But Robin's so young that she just feels betrayed. She doesn't understand that this is for her benefit and it's something that might be good for her. She's just struggling because she's dealing with racist bullies and just not understanding this culture. She's completely in culture shock, and she doesn't speak the language, which is super difficult because she can't even communicate with people and she can't even understand when they're making fun of her, which is just absolutely heartbreaking to read. Robin feels like an outsider as she's trying to acclimate, and even her new step family isn't really helping her that much. So it's a difficult situation all around, but as she grows up, you get to follow her as she comes to accept her identity and discover who she is and kind of learn to blend the two, her Korean upbringing, but her American upbringing as well once she moves. You see her come to understand why her mother took her away from all she'd ever known. And I think it was really heartbreaking at a lot of times, but it was also a beautiful story. The art style was also beautiful. I loved it. She comes to find comic classes as something that she can identify with and something she can enjoy in America. And I loved seeing her come to art. And then it was a really nice, well-rounded story because you're holding like the graphic novel that she actually wrote telling the story. So you know that she found love of comics while she was in America, and it was something that she ended up like spending her entire life on, if that makes sense. It was just kind of outside of the book. It was a nice ending to it all. I think this really is a story that a lot of immigrants would appreciate. I think it did a good job of explaining what it might be like for someone who doesn't speak the language to move somewhere that they're not comfortable with and to have to deal with racism and bullying and have to try and also accept their new life. Like, I loved the amount of levels that the story hit, and I thought it was a very impactful graphic novel that I thoroughly enjoyed. So I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was super good and would definitely recommend it. Next, I read Beach Read by Emily Henry. So I had been so excited about this book because 1, the concept sounded really, really good, and 2, I'd heard nothing but good things about it. And I did actually enjoy it a lot. I don't think I enjoyed it quite as much as other people did, but while I was writing my notes for this video, I realized that I did actually enjoy it more than I thought I had. I don't know if that really makes any sense, but Emily Henry, this is an adult romance book, but I've actually read one of her young adult novels. That's what she's written before. So actually 2 of them. So she has one that she co-wrote with Brittany Cavallaro, and I didn't really like that one so much, but I really enjoyed A Million Junes by her. Now, she just announced recently that there's another adult romance novel that she has coming out, which I definitely will be reading. But this one is set on a Michigan beach, and it's 2 cottages that are next to each other, and in one you have a literary fiction writer who's suffering from writer's block, and in the other you have a writer of romance who doesn't really believe in romance anymore, so is in turn suffering from writer's block as well. So the 2 of them decide that they are going to switch what they're writing for the summer. So he is going to try and write the next great romance happily ever after novel, and she is going to try and write the next great American novel. And that is the story. So I was super intrigued by that, especially as a writer. I felt like it would be something I would love. Now, this has kind of a number of tropes going on in it, so I didn't realize before going into it that they actually knew each other before this novel started. They went to college together, and in that way you have a second chance romance kind of, but you also have an opposites attract kind of thing because they're pretty much complete opposites. Like, they do have some similarities, but a lot of them is very opposite. And you also have a kind of enemies to lovers plotline, but like really light, because basically they're only enemies to her, to January, because they're enemies in her head. They're rivals in college, so she has this little enemies thing going on in her head, but that didn't last very long. So that's kind of the enemies to lovers plotline that I tend to enjoy. I really love second chance romance. That's one of my favorite, actually that is probably my favorite romance trope, and this was definitely a good instance of it. I'm all about stories that hit multiple layers. I don't like stories to be one note and just have one emotion throughout. I like to see the levels that they can have, and this is another book that hit a lot of different levels. So while it is that lovely, like happily ever after romance, it's also a super emotional story and kind of a deep dive into each of the characters and their past, but also their present. They're both kind of dealing with some recent shakeups in their lives, and you see them try to get through that with each other. So particularly with January, her father has just died, and she found out that her father had been cheating on her mother. She found out after he died, so now she's completely shook by that, obviously. She feels like her entire world has just been completely turned upside down because she believed her father was this great caring father figure, but now she figured out that he has done some terrible things. So there's a lot of grief that she's dealing with and a lot of things she has to figure out. But Gus also has a lot to figure out. His backstory is also not that great. He's also had some really tragic things happen to him, and he's dealing with a certain kind of grief of his own, and he also is dealing with the past abuse that he suffered from at the hands of his father. I think that January and Gus were a perfect match though. And despite all of that heaviness to the story, there also was just like, it was still the perfect summer beach read, to be honest, like a perfect summer romance, because you're transported to this Michigan beach town. And I loved it as a writer too, because writing is such a prevalent part of the story. So you get to have little snippets kind of what January is writing, this great American novel. And I thought it sounded really good. Like I really liked what she was writing. And for me, her experience as a writer was also really relatable. Her kind of self-doubts that she's going through and the process of like having writer's block, but also needing to write something is obviously super difficult. And I loved seeing her and Gus's writing process and how they were as writers and creative people. This was a super angsty romance, basically about two characters in turmoil coming to find each other at the perfect time. It just had so much going on to it, but once again, it was a story where nothing felt out of place. I felt like it all really fit. I think that some people might think that it has too much emotion to be marketed as like a cutesy romance, but I liked the fact that it had all that emotion going for it, because I still think it managed to be a cutesy romance while having a lot of emotion and heaviness to the story. So it definitely like was a roller coaster at times, but it was a really great one. So overall, it was a really well-rounded story. I felt like it was really realistic because it hit so many levels, and I super enjoyed it. So I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, maybe a 4.5. I'm kind of torn a little bit on the rating, but like I said, after taking notes, I feel like it might be a little bit closer to a 4.5. I don't know if that makes sense. Like I feel like when I just finish a book, I am thinking of my feelings on it and they're just so fresh that it can be hard to dissect them. But after having read it a while ago and then actually like formulating and writing down my thoughts, my feelings can change sometimes for the better or for the worse, but this time I think it was definitely for the better. Now I mentioned recently, I can't remember what video it was, but I've read a fair amount of books about dance. I think it was my reading vlog where I read Love Boat Taipei, but I don't know why, but I've been reading a lot of books about dance and like ballet in particular, and it's just is one of those things where like you pick up one book and for some reason the next books that you pick up have like similar things in it. I don't know if that's just me talking, but that happens to me frequently. So this is the first book that I picked up that had dance in it, and that is Tiny Pretty Things by Dhonielle Clayton and Sona Charaipotra. I listened to the audiobook for this one and I picked it up kind of on a whim. Like I wasn't really thinking about it. Honestly, okay, I'll paint the picture for you. I became obsessed with Roller Coaster Tycoon. I bought it on my Switch and I started playing that, and then I realized I could get the classic version that I used to play, that I got in the cereal box way back in the day, and it consumed my life, but I realized I could play it now, and I was like, So I downloaded it and I haven't opened it since like probably a month ago because I know that it would consume me. I played like 30 hours over the course of a really short amount of time. So while I was playing Roller Coaster Tycoon, however, I discovered it was a really great time to listen to audiobooks because it's totally mindless. You don't have to really think of anything. You're just like building roller coasters. I mean, I don't really build the roller coasters. I use the pre-built ones because I'm lazy and that's not what I like about it. But you're building theme parks and you can just like have an audiobook in your ears, and it was beautiful, okay? It was a great time. That was a lot of fun. So that's when I listened to this book. I think over the course of a day, maybe 2 days, but I'm pretty sure it only took me 1 day to listen to it. I was doing that and then I was cleaning the house. That's the other thing that I did. And wow, was it a wild ride. There were a couple of times that I had to stop it and be like, what did I just hear? What was just in my ears? Oh my god, certain things, like there's one scene in particular that just, I think of it and it makes me cringe. But in this book, we follow Gigi, June, and Beth, and they are all very different characters, but they are all attendees at Manhattan's top ballet school. So Gigi is the new girl. She's from California and she's just interested in dance. She's not really interested in the drama that the rest of the girls seem to engage in. She just loves dance and wants to dance. Beth, on the other hand, is fully interested in the drama. She has her sister's legacy to live up to, and that pressure is definitely forcing her to crack, let me tell you. And then we have June, who needs to land the lead role because she pretty much is always the alternate, and her mother is totally done with that. Her mother doesn't understand why she's going to this dance school where she's just always an alternate, and it's pretty much her last chance to actually live up to her mother's mother's expectations before her mother sends her to just a regular school. So we have 3 perspectives here, obviously, but all of them are super unique and have something to offer. I feel like oftentimes when it's a multi-perspective book, which I do enjoy, I love getting different sides of the same story, I will always have like one perspective that I don't really care for, one that doesn't stand out, and one that I kind of just want to push through. Or on the other hand, there will be one that I always look forward to, and that's my favorite. But with this instance, I really enjoyed all of them equally. They were totally different and like wild to read. June's perspective is particularly difficult to read because she's half Korean and her mother is Korean and has very hard expectations on her that she has to try and live up to. So June in turn puts a lot of pressure on herself, and that comes out in some really unhealthy ways. I do want to say that there's a trigger warning for eating disorders with this story. Also, bullying is definitely a main aspect of it. But June's perspective was definitely very interesting because it was kind of like a quiet observer, but not entirely. Like, you really need to get used to unreliable narrators with this story because you can't really trust anyone. They like all could be like, I don't know, there's just a lot of drama in this story. I felt for June because she needs her mother to see that dance is worth it. She loves dance and she wants her mother to see that, but she definitely also needs a lot of help. Gigi was definitely the most lovable character. She is new, she's from California, and she just honestly has a passion for the art of dance. She's a Black character, so this definitely was a very diverse story, but I just loved the fact that she was really carefree to an extent, and she just didn't want all the drama. However, she's not really given an option to not get involved in it because pretty much everyone who goes to the school and who participates in this dancing, they get roped into all this drama that's happening. Gigi is targeted for a number of reasons, but particularly because she's from California, she's new, and she's doing so well. She's rising up against people who have been here forever and they are not having it. Which brings me to Bet. Bet is definitely the hardest character's perspective to read because she is just like, she was wow. Like, again, I felt bad for her. I feel like every character, well, they had their kind of demonized moments, they were all humanized at the same time. Like, even though she's kind of the mean girl character, you felt bad for her because of her situation. She doesn't have control over it, but it's once again a thing where she has so much pressure on her. She doesn't really know what to do, and she's just so desperate to be successful that it just leads to all this drama. I think this was a great depiction of that villainous mean girl character who will do anything to get to the top because she was multi-dimensional. She wasn't just that mean character that you don't really understand why. You could totally understand why. You were given that backstory and it explained all of her personality. All of the characters were super engaging, and once again, I feel like this was definitely a character-driven story. However, it also was drama-driven entirely, in case you haven't gotten that point. But I loved the fact that all the supporting cast of characters were also super well developed. So they definitely could be really frustrating at times. There's some certain boy characters that I just think of and I get real mad, but it was a great cast overall. It felt like, honestly, this book was a performance of its own. Like, it was its own ballet because you go through like each season and there's just so many things happening and you have a great cast and each character plays its role. And am I trying to get too deep into this analysis? I don't know, but this book just blew my mind. I think this seemed like a pretty accurate depiction to me of the cutthroat world of dance where you can't trust anyone because everyone's looking out for themselves and wants to get to the top. It made me think a lot of Center Stage, which I haven't seen in forever, but I remember watching that movie when I was younger because my family danced all the time. So I've been in the dance world, definitely not to like this extent of how intense it is, but it made me think of Center Stage a lot. I will say this book features a lot of girl drama, so there's a lot of that kind of like catty girl hating, which I don't generally like, but in this instance I didn't mind it so much because I understood like it because there was a greater goal. It wasn't just girls hating other girls for the sake of hating other girls. Now, it's definitely an addictive read. I listened to the audiobook super quickly, like I told you guys, but I will say it's definitely also very stressful. There's so much happening and I can't say that enough, that it will like keep you on the edge of your seat with all the stuff that is going on and all of the like twisted web that's happening. So I did actually go ahead and I bought, I think it's down, where are my pink books? They're right behind me. I bought the sequel, which I had waited. I was gonna wait until I finished this one, but I went ahead and ordered the sequel, and I'm definitely going to try and read it in September because I want to know what's gonna happen and I want to know where all these characters are going to end up. I never said my rating. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. It was like super good. It was a lot, but it was really good. And now finally, this book is unfortunately a disappointment, but it is The Paper Girl of Paris by Jordan Taylor. I gave this a 2.5 out of 5 stars. I feel like, no, I think a 2.5 is good. I'm always so torn on my ratings, but in this story we follow Alice, and Alice's grandmother has just died, and she left behind in her will this apartment in Paris that no one knew that she had, but she left it behind to Alice. So Alice and her mother and her father go to Paris to find this apartment and discover that it's basically a time capsule, and it's told in alternate perspectives between Alice as she's piecing together why this apartment was left behind, discovering some stuff about her family and her grandmother, and also the other perspective that you get is actually set during World War II, and it is following Adeline, who is a 16-year-old. Alice is also 16, that's worth mentioning. So they're basically like parallel stories, but Adeline is living in Nazi-occupied Paris during World War II, and she is engaging in the resistance movement, which is obviously really risky. A lot of you guys were asking for more of my elaborate thoughts on this on Goodreads, because on Goodreads I just put my rating. I think I should probably link to these videos, like the timestamp exactly where I'm talking about the book. I might do that. Let me know if you would like me to, but I just said I gave it a 2.5 out of 5 stars, and all of you were like, why? So now I will tell you why. I really badly wanted to love this story, like super badly. I was so excited for it. The concept sounds amazing. I love the parallelism there between Alice in modern day and discovering stuff about her family, and then Adeline in World War II. I love historical fiction, so I felt like it was just going to be a good combination, but unfortunately that selling feature for me just didn't work out. In the beginning you get quite a bit of Alice, mostly because it's kind of setting the scene for the story, and then once you get Adeline you get a lot of her, and then I would kind of forget that Alice existed at all until her perspective would come along, and I just found that it never really added anything to the story for me. I was always waiting, like I said, there's sometimes that one perspective that I'm always waiting for, and in this one particular, like I just kind of wanted to get to Adeline's parts. I didn't really care about Alice's parts because they kind of felt a little bit superfluous. I understand why there was that multi-generational aspect of the story. I get that it was showing the parallelism between their two lives, living, well, not living, but in the same place, but totally different time periods, but I just didn't think that Alice mattered that much. Like, she just kind of provided a vehicle for Adeline's stories, but her points were kind of like, there was a mental health plot line that I didn't think was very well developed, and that was kind of the main thing I felt like was going on in her time period. The other thing was her trying to piece together this mystery, but I felt like the mystery was really weak, and most of the answers you just got when Adeline was speaking, and it was her perspective. I think maybe if the mental health plot line had gotten a little bit more time and attention that it deserved, it felt more like an aside sort of additional thing that didn't exactly fit in or make sense. Like, I got why it was there, but I don't think it was integrated into the story enough. I think if it may have been done a little bit better, I would have liked the story a bit more. But I just think that Adeline completely drove the plot forward. I was way more interested in her work in the resistance and trying to keep up this appearance of being a socialite in Paris, but also she's defying everything that the people around her are just kind of accepting what's happening in occupation, and she doesn't understand that. I liked the sisterhood relationship that came into Adeline's plotline. I do think that like it should have been another perspective maybe that Adeline's plotline was. Like, I don't really know how to say it without spoiling, so that's all I'm really gonna say. If you have read this story, I think I would have liked it a little bit more if the perspective had been from someone different, but I do get why it is who it is. But I think that seeing the occupation and how like that progressed was really difficult to read, and also seeing the risks that Adeline was taking being involved in the resistance was very interesting. But like, I just can't remember anything that was really happening in Alice's plotline, and I don't know, to me that just made like a big part of the book just not really matter to me, and I didn't really care about it. I did enjoy Adeline's portion, so that's why I gave it a 2.5. I think if you are starting out with historical fiction or it's something that you want to try out, this would be a good book to start out with, especially if you're a younger reader. I think it would be a great way to be introduced to the genre. I don't think it was a bad book by any means. I just don't think it delivered what I wanted it to. I've read so many historical fictions before, and like I don't want to compare it to something like The Nightingale, which is an adult historical fiction and a totally different realm, but I can't help but think of it because both of them are set in Nazi occupied France and they deal with similar topics. They deal with sisters too. So I just think of The Nightingale and I feel like I love that one so much that this one was just kind of a letdown for me. But I think if it was one of the first historical fictions you've read, particularly World War II, you might really like it. Like, I don't think this is bad, it just wasn't for me. So I feel like this video is going to be ages long because I had a lot to say about all of these books. I don't know what it is, but I just could not stop talking today, so I'm sorry, but I hope you guys enjoyed. This is my last quarantine read, so I will be back very soon, probably in the next couple of weeks, with a recent reads video because I have been reading quite a bit recently. Well, 2020 has been a mess and my brain has been a mess too. I've actually been doing pretty well with reading recently. It's been going like up and down, but lately it's been good. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please let me know if you have read any of these books, what you thought of them. If you disagreed with me, I would also love to know. I like hearing different perspectives. I think that's what's great about reading. No two people read the same book, and I think that's a beautiful thing. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video soon. Bye!